Boswell. It may be of use, sir, to have a dictionary to ascertain the pronunciation. Johnson. Why, sir, my dictionary shows you the accents of words if you can but remember them. Boswell. But, sir, we want marks to ascertain the pronunciation of the vowels. Sheridan, I believe, has finished such a work. Johnson. Why, sir, consider how much easier it is to learn a language by the ear than by any marks. Sheridan's dictionary may do very well, but you cannot always carry it about with you. And when you want the word, you have not the dictionary. It is like a man who has a sword that will not draw. It is an admirable sword, to be sure, but while your enemy is cutting your throat, you are unable to use it. Besides, sir, what entitles Sheridan to fix the pronunciation of English? He has, in the first place, the disadvantage of being an Irishman, and if he says he will fix it after the example of the best company, why, that differs among themselves. I remember an instance. When I published the plan for my dictionary, Lord Chesterfield told me that the word great should be pronounced so as to rhyme to state, which is true, Johnson. And Sir William Young sent me word that it should be pronounced so as to rhyme with seat, like great. And then none but an Irishman would pronounce it ingrat. Now here were two men of the highest rank, the one the best speaker of the House of Lords, the other the best speaker of the House of Commons, differing entirely. I, Boswell, again visited him at night. Finding him in a very good humor, I ventured to lead him to the subject of the situation in a future state, having much curiosity to know his notions on that point. Johnson said, Why, sir, the happiness of an unembodied spirit will consist in a consciousness of the favor of God, in the contemplation of truth, and in the possession of felicitating ideas. I said, But, sir, is there any harm in our forming to ourselves conjectures as to the particulars of our happiness, though the Scripture have said but very little on the subject? We know not what we shall be. Johnson said, Sir, there is no harm. What philosophy suggests to us on this topic is probable. What Scripture tells us is certain. Dr. Henry Moore has carried it as far as philosophy can. You may buy both his theological and philosophical works in 2-volume folio for about 8 shillings. I said, One of the most pleasing thoughts is that we shall see our friends again. Johnson said, Yes, sir, but you must consider that when we are become purely rational, many of our friendships will be cut off. Many friendships are formed by a community of sensual pleasures. All these will be cut off. We form many friendships with bad men because they have agreeable qualities, and they can be useful to us, but after death they can no longer be of any use to us. We form many friendships by mistake, imagining people to be different from what they really are. After death we shall see everyone in a true light. Then, sir, they talk of our meeting our relations. But then all relations is dissolved, and we shall have no regard for one person more than another, but for their real value. However, we shall either have the satisfaction of meeting our friends, or be satisfied without meeting them. I said, Yes, sir, we see in Scripture that Dives will still remain an anxious concern about his brethren. Johnson said, Why, sir, we must either suppose that passage to be metaphorical, or hold with many divines, and all the purgatorians, that departed souls do not all at once arrive at the utmost perfection of which they are capable. I said, I think, sir, there is a very rational supposition. Johnson said, Why, yes, sir, but we do not know if it is true one. There is no harm in believing it, but you must not compel others to make it an article of faith, for it is not revealed. I said, Do you think, sir, it is wrong if a man who holds the doctrines of purgatory to pray for the souls of his deceased friends? Johnson said, Why no, sir. I said, I have been told that in the liturgy of the Episcopal Church of Scotland there was a form of prayer for the dead. Johnson said, Sir, it is not in the liturgy which Laud framed for the Episcopal Church of Scotland. If there is a liturgy older than that, I should be glad to see it. I said, as to our employment in a future state, the sacred writings say little. The revelation, however, of St. John gives us many ideas, and particularly mentions music. Johnson said, why, sir, ideas must be given you by means of something which you know. And as to music, there are some philosophers and divines who have maintained that we shall not be spiritualized to such a degree, but that something of matter very much refined will remain. In that case, music may make a part of our future felicity. I said, I do not know whether there are any well-attested stories of the appearance of ghosts. You know there is a famous story of the appearance of Mrs. Veal, prefix to Drelincourt on Death. Johnson said, I believe, sir, that it is given up. I believe the woman declared upon her deathbed that it was a lie. There's a footnote here that says, this fiction is known to have been invented by Daniel Defoe and was added to Drelincourt's book to make it sell. The first edition had it not. I said, this objection is made against the truth of ghosts appearing, that if they are in the state of happiness, it would be a punishment to them to return to this world, and if they are in a state of misery, it would be giving them a respite. Johnson said, why, sir, as the happiness or misery of unembodied spirits does not depend upon place, but is intellectual, we cannot say that they are less happy or less miserable by appearing on earth. We went down between 12 and 1 to Mrs. Williams' room and drank tea. I mentioned that we were to have the remains of Mr. Gray in prose and verse, published by Mr. Mason. Johnson said, I think we have had enough of Gray. I see they have published a splendid edition of Arkenside's works. One bad ode may be suffered, but a number of them together makes one sick. I said, Arkenside's distinguished poem is his Pleasures of Imagination, but for my part I never could admire it so much as most people do. Johnson said, Sir, I could not read it through. I said, I have read it through, but I did not find any great power in it. I mentioned Elwal, the heretic whose trial Sir John Pringle had given me to read. Johnson said, Sir, Mr. Elwal was, I think, an ironmonger at Wolverhampton, and he had a mind to make himself famous by being the founder of a new sect, which he wished much should be called. That's what it says. Elwalians. He held that everything in the Old Testament that was not typical was to be of perpetual observance. And so he wore a riband in the plaits of his coat, and he also wore a beard. I remember I had the honor of dining in company with Mr. Ilwal. There was one Barter, a miller, who wrote against him, and so you had the controversy between Mr. Elwell and Mr. Barter. To try to make himself distinguish, he wrote a letter to King George II, challenging him to dispute with him, in which he said, George, if you be afraid to come by yourself to dispute with a poor old man, you may bring 1,000 of your blackguards with you. And if you should still be afraid, you may bring 1,000 of your red guards. The letter adds something of the impudence of Junus to our present king. But the men of Wolverhampton were not so inflammable as the Common Council of London, so Mr. Ilwell failed in his scheme of making himself a man of great consequence. On Tuesday, March 31st, he and I dined at General Paoli's. A question was started, whether the state of marriage was natural to man. Johnson said, Sir, it is so far from being natural for a man and woman to live in a state of marriage that we find all the motives which they have for remaining in that connection and the restraints which civilized society imposes to prevent separation are hardly sufficient to keep them together. The general said that in a state of nature a man and woman uniting together would form a strong and constant affection by the natural mutual pleasure each would receive, and that the same causes of dissension would not rise between them, as occur between husband and wife in a civilized state. Johnson said, Sir, they would have dissensions enough though of another kind. One would choose to go on hunting in this wood, the other in that. One would choose to go fishing in this lake, the other in that. Or perhaps one would choose to go a-hunting when the other would choose to go a-fishing, and so they would part. Besides, sir, a savage man and a savage woman meet by chance, and when the man sees another woman that pleases him better, he will leave the first. We then fell into a disquisition whether there is any beauty independent of utility. Disquisition. The general maintained there was not. Dr. Johnson maintained that there was, and he instanced a coffee cup which he held in his hand, the painting of which was of no real use, as the cup would hold the coffee equally well if plain, yet the painting was beautiful. We talked of the strange custom of swearing in conversation. The general said that all barbarous nations swore from a certain violence of temper that could not be confined to earth, but was always reaching at the powers above. He said, too, that there was greater variety in swearing, in proportion as there was a greater variety of religious ceremonies. Dr. Johnson went home with me to my lodging in Conduit Street and drank tea, previous to our going to the Pantheon, which neither of us had seen before. He said, Goldsmith's Life of Parnell is poor, but that is poorly written, but not that it is poorly written, but that he has poor materials. For nobody can write the life of a man but those who have eaten, drink, and lived in social intercourse with him. I said that if it was not troublesome and presuming too much, I would request him to tell me all the little circumstances of his life, what schools he attended, when he came to Oxford, when he came to London, and etc., and etc. He did not disapprove of my curiosity as to the particulars, but said, They'll come out by degrees as we talk together. He censured Roughhead's Life of Pope and said he knows nothing of Pope and nothing of poetry. Praised Dr. Joseph Warden's Essays on Pope, but said he supposed we should have no more of it, as the author had not been able to persuade the world to think of Pope as he did. I said, Why, sir, should that prevent him from continuing his work? He is an ingenious counsel who has made the most of his cause. He is not obliged to gain it. Johnson said, But, sir, there's a difference when the cause is a man's own making. We talked of the proper use of riches. Johnson said, If I were a man of a great estate, I would drive all the rascals whom I did not like out of the country at an election. Out of the county at an election. I asked him how far he thought wealth should be employed in hospitality. Johnson said, You are to consider that ancient hospitality, of which we hear so much, was in an uncommercial country, when men, being idle, were glad to be entertained at rich men's tables. But in a commercial country, a busy country, time becomes precious, and therefore hospitality is not so much valued. No doubt there is still room for a certain degree of it, and a man has a satisfaction in seeing his friends eating and drinking around him. But promiscuous hospitality is not the way to gain real influence. You must help some people at table before others. You must ask some people how they like their wine oftener than others. You therefore offend more people than you please. You are like the French statesman who said, when he granted a favor, Je foi dix miscontents autres ingrat, which I will translate later, because there's no translation here. Besides, sir, being entertained ever so well at a man's table impresses no lasting regard or esteem. No, sir, the way to make sure of power and influence is by lending money confidentially to your neighbors at a small interest, or perhaps at no interest at all, and having their bonds in your possession. I said, May not a man, sir, employ his riches to advantage in educating young men of merit? Johnson said, Yes, sir, if they fall in your way. But if it is understood that you patronize young men of merit, you will be harassed with solicitations. You will have numbers forced upon you who have no merit. Some will force them upon you from mistaken partiality, and some from downright interested motives, without scruple, and you will be disgraced. Were I a rich man, I would propagate all kinds of trees that will grow in the open air. A greenhouse is childish. I would introduce foreign animals into the country, for instance, the reindeer. That's pretty fucking weird, Johnson. Footnote here. This project has since been realized. Sir Henry Liddell, who made a spirited tour into Lapland, brought 2 reindeer to his estate in Northumberland, where they bred. But the race has unfortunately perished. No reindeer in England. So there's Christmas tie-in right there, huh? The conversation now turned on critical subjects. Johnson said, Bayes, in the rehearsal, is a mighty silly character. It was intended to be like a particular man. It could only be diverting while that man was remembered. But I question whether it was meant for Dryden, as has been reported. For we know some of the passages said to be ridiculed were written since the rehearsal. At least a passage mentioned in the preface is of a latter date. I maintain that it had merit as a general satire on the self-importance of dramatic authors, but even in this light he held it very cheap. Footnote here, too, about the preface. Dr. Johnson seems to have meant the address to the reader with a key subjoined to it, which have been prefixed in the modern editions of the play. He did not know, it appears, that several editions were made to the rehearsal after the first edition. We then walked to the Pantheon. The first view of it did not strike us as so much as Ranelagh, of which he said the Coupe de l'Exil was the finest thing he had ever seen. Coupe d'Oeil. Coupdoeil. The truth is, Ranelagh is of a more beautiful form. More of it, or rather indeed the whole rotunda, appears at once, and it is better lighted. However, as Johnson observed, we saw the Pantheon in times of mourning, when there was a dull uniformity, whereas we had seen Ranelagh, the view we enlivened with a gay profusion of colors. Mrs. Boswell of Gunthwat in Yorkshire joined us and entered into conversation with us. Johnson said to me afterwards, Sir, this is a mighty intelligent lady. I said there was not half a guinea's worth of pleasure in seeing this place. Johnson said, But, sir, there is half a guinea's worth of inferiority to the other people in not having seen it. I said, I doubt, sir, whether there are many happy people here. Johnson said, Yes, sir, there are many happy people here. There are many people here who are watching hundreds, and who think hundreds are watching them. I don't know what this Pantheon is. I missed that plan of going over there. Did I skip something? I don't think so. I'll have to look back. Anyway, that's it for Boswell for today. Hopefully I'll be back tomorrow on Christmas, if I don't lose power, to do it again. Till next time, bye from Boswell.